Everybody, if we could get started. I just want to first of all thank you all for coming, and especially thank Jo Marie for coming today to talk with us. So this is going to be a program on Jo Marie's going to talk about her role. She's the general counsel for the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. So she's going to talk a little bit about her role, talk a little bit about the Speaker and the members and sort of how they perform their roles and some of the issues that come up with discipline with the members. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, have her talk a little bit about legal ethics and how that plays out in a position working as a general counsel for the Speaker, and also in committees and House committees, how that plays out a little bit. So I actually had the privilege of working with Jo Marie, I guess 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
I was in the Speaker's office and worked pretty closely with her, and she has been with the Speaker for 11 years now.
I have known the Speaker since he was a freshman member of Congress, actually.
So I don't even know.
1990.
So
you all weren't even born yet.
So she has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the House. She's worked on House committees. She's worked before John Boehner became the Speaker, he was the majority leader. She worked with him then, and now she's been working with him as the Speaker, as his general counsel, and working on floor operations. So she has a wealth of knowledge, and so she'll speak for about 20 minutes on kind of her role and her experience, and then we're going to open it up to questions that you all have for her and with regard to her role currently, and also just general legal ethics questions about the House. And a quick announcement, there were some forms that are circulating around that we need all of you to sign in order for you to get your ethics credits for this program. And at the end, if you could just leave them at the front table here, we'll collect all of those and make sure that everyone gets their credits. So with that, I will turn it over to Jo Marie.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a while since I've been in a law school classroom, and I'm getting sweaty palms already. But anyway, as Jared said, Jared actually should do a class on how you make yourself known to a senior staffer as a staff assistant, because he's very good at it. Actually kept in contact. There are a lot of very good things to learn about how Jared has done it. It's been great actually keeping in contact with him, and it was a great experience working with you too. So
thank you.
Very, very nice all around. As Jared did say, I've worked for Boehner. I first got to know him when I was a committee counsel at the Education, and at that time it was the Education and Labor Committee. I actually started on the Hill as a committee counsel. One of the reasons I actually kind of like talking to law students is because when I was in your positions, I just never really saw myself as like eventually becoming general counsel to the Speaker of the House. It just doesn't seem kind of possible. But guess what? It is. You know, you too, if you ever want to go that route, could actually do that. Although in this talk, you may not want to. Would like to actually talk a little bit about Boehner's style, because I think in understanding the current way in which the House approaches its ethical issues and its ethical problems, it's actually kind of important to understand how he is. He was he's one of 12 brothers and sisters. Grew up in a large family where he learned to communicate well with other people. It's a skill I actually think that has actually caused him to rise to become Speaker, because he has those kinds of skills. In the ethical world, you have to be able to communicate with your members, and you have to be able to communicate with them extremely honestly. So I'm actually going to go through kind of the House leadership and what the roles are and kind of those communication roles. The one thing I will tell you that Boehner does and believes very strongly in is treating his colleagues with respect. It's kind of the very beginning point. And it actually helps when you have to have those tough conversations with a member about whatever those issues are that have arisen. I'm sure you probably read just like anybody else does, the troubles that have actually gone in the house. We've actually had some fairly recent troubles as well. But he does. He treats people, you know, in the house like an adult. He actually brought that with him when he left the education where he used to be chairman of that committee. I don't know if y'all know his entire story, but Boehner made a name for himself as a freshman member, and interestingly enough, it was over an ethics issue. It actually had to do with the thing that was called the house bank scandal. And you all probably aren't unaware of it, but there was this entity in the house that really wasn't a bank, and members could borrow as much as they wanted to out of the bank, even if they didn't have the funds to support it. And Boehner, as a freshman member, began to ask questions like, what is this thing? As a result of that, those questions, it turns out that it was this major, major scandal in the house. There were 24 members who had more than 400 bounced checks out of this house bank. Interestingly enough, my prior boss was one of the 24 members who actually had all these checks. And interestingly enough, out of that, he was the only one to survive his election that next Congress. But this is really how Boehner sort of cut his teeth, was really understanding how the house as an institution is responsible for itself, and really grew from that. As a result of that, he really did make a name and reputation among his colleagues as someone who was a leader. So that, and the timing of all this is, Boehner was elected in 1990, and then in 1994, the House had been controlled for 40 years by the Democrats. And a number, and I will tell you, it was ethical issues that were involved in the turnover of the House when Republicans took over the House in 1995. But Boehner rose to power and actually became the conference chair in the House. He was conference chair for 4 years. Another issue came up, and one thing led to another, and Boehner actually lost his chairmanship of the House Republican Conference and ended up going to committee, which is where I got to know him really, really well. And I had been a committee counsel for a number of years when he came back to the committee, and so ended up having a really great working relationship with him. 2006 comes along, we had another scandal. You may remember this scandal, maybe not, but it was over the Jack Abramoff scandals that came through. And it caused a major turmoil in the House. Tom DeLay, oh my God, I'm sorry. I should have turned it off. Apologize, guys. Well, I want to think they're persistent. So anyway, in 2006, this next scandal comes along. The then majority leader of the House, Tom DeLay, actually resigned Congress, and it left open the majority leader position. My boss actually decided to run for the majority leader position. He'd been at the Education Workforce Committee, had built a very strong bipartisan. Also, I will tell you, my boss is a partisan, he's a Republican, conservative Republican, but had built a lot of relationships with the Democrats and actually had put through a number of pieces of legislation. And as a result of that, actually won the trust of his colleagues. And so in 2006, my boss was elected majority leader. He brought me over with him to the leadership office. At that time, I actually ran his floor operation, which basically meant every bill that comes through the House, I scheduled, my boss scheduled. And so everything from, if you're familiar with House processes at all, it was everything that was put through unanimous consent to suspensions to Rules Committee, all of that went through John Boehner and consequently me. At the end of 2006, we had yet another scandal. It was the Mark Foley scandal over the House pages. And you will recall that, and I'm going to get more into this about exactly the changes in the House rules that came in about as a result of that, we ended up having another flip. Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. She instituted a number of changes in the way the House actually disciplines itself, and we still have those provisions in position today. Of course, we all know that 4 years ago, there was another flip in the House and my boss became Speaker. And in that role, the Speaker's office, just so you're also aware, I had actually done Boehner's General Counsel works throughout all of those. The duties of the institution of the House literally fall squarely on the Speaker. So my role has actually become a much more legal role as he has gone up the ladder of leadership. So that's pretty much it in a story, or in a nutshell of who I am, sort of, how the ethics rules have, or the ethics issues have had a major impact on what has happened over time. Right now, we have in about 10 days, we're going to have another election, which is going to set in motion, the setup for next Congress. I'm not going to make predictions about anything other than feel fairly confident that the House will stay majority Republican. There's some predictions about it may become more Republican. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see about that. It will impact policy questions about what happens. Ethical issues, I don't think so. Not so much. It's not really going to matter kind of which party is in control. But I did want to give you just a very short understanding of how that process works. And so you have the Speaker's office. This is on the majority side, the Republican side. Democrats actually have exactly corresponding offices, except they don't have the Speaker. So then you have the Majority Leader, which I told you I was in. Majority Leader is another one that actually does a lot of communications with members. As I said, that he or she, in this case he, is the one that schedules the floor votes and what is on the floor, constant communication with members. So any issue that can impact that, like an ethical problem, clearly has to be communicated to the Majority Leader as well. The whipping operation, have any of you worked on the Hill before? Any of you? Okay, so a few people are familiar with it in a very personal way. I will tell you, I found that you can learn so much about how the House works, Senate works, and kind of civics books, but it really helps just actually doing it. But anyway, so the whip is the person who literally finds out where members are, what they're thinking, and it can include ethical problems like, why are we putting up with that guy's ethical problems? I'm having to answer my constituents constantly about his problems. Why, I don't want you to do anything until you fix that. That's the kind of stuff that the whip's operation will hear. Obviously, the whip has a lot more to it, which is figuring out where members are on votes, figuring out where they are policy-wise, and then seeing if there's actually a consensus that can be built. So that communication constantly happens as well. So the fourth office in leadership is our conference chair, which again, I told you Boehner was conference chair years ago. That's the outward communication, the sort of public face of the Republican conference in the House. And it's also the internal communications of relaying to members about press information. It also has some nuts and bolts, like how you run a member's office, really like how you answer constituent mail, how you do batch emails. I mean, literally they do a lot. But again, there are other eyes and ears when it comes to ethics issues. So that's kind of the configuration of how the House works. Boehner is actually in charge, he's responsible for everything in the House. And there are a couple of committees that I'm going to actually point out to you that he is primarily has the key role for. One is House Rules Committee. The House Rules were actually written by Thomas Jefferson, and they are based on the House of Commons parliamentary procedures from the 18th century. I've even been told if you were to take somebody from the House of Commons from the 18th century, if you could actually dig one up and bring him back to life and set him on the House floor, he would understand. It is a he would understand what is going on. And oddly enough, today that same member in the House of Commons in England would not, in the United Kingdom, would not be able to do that. It's just kind of funny that we actually have rules that are much more aligned. In the House Rules Committee, they create all the other committees, which gets me to the ethics discussion. Does anybody know where members' responsibility for ethics comes from? Anybody know?
Constitution.
Constitution. Thank you. It is the Constitution. Just so you're aware, in Article 1, whoever said that, do you even know where? Oh, there you go. Do you happen to know what it's called, that particular provision? Okay if you don't.
No, I don't.
It's the discipline clause. The Article 1, which is, or that your legislature is, Article 2 is the president, Article 3 the judiciary. Article 1 actually vests that responsibility in each house. So each house is supposed to discipline its members. The House chooses to, the Senate actually has a corresponding one, but the House chooses to and has created the Committee on Ethics. Right now, the Committee on Ethics is comprised of 10 members. It is one of the few areas where you have absolute bipartisanship in the committee. Every place else, it's majority rule. The Ethics Committee is absolutely even Steven. It's 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. 5 Republicans are chosen by the Speaker, John Boehner. 5 Democrats are chosen by Democrat leader Nancy Pelosi. So it's absolutely even Steven. When I had alluded to Nancy Pelosi when she became Speaker, there were reforms. She pushed through the House a series of reforms, series of changes, one of which created a thing called the Office of Congressional Ethics. And there's a lot of questions. I suppose we could spend all day talking about whether or not it actually has sort of a constitutional underpinning or not, but it's actually an outside entity. It is not members of Congress who actually sit on the OCE. And it has its own set of processes where people, anybody new, can actually file something with the OCE against anybody in the House, that's members and staff, about something that you would allege that they have done. The OCE has an internal process for how it reviews it and then refers their findings and their report over to the House Ethics Committee. The Ethics Committee can do all this on its own. And the Ethics Committee actually has some things that are mandatory that they review. For instance, if a member is indicted or if a member pleads out on a felony, there is an automatic requirement for the Ethics Committee to act. So there are these sort of automatic ways in which it does happen. The OCE, in a lot of ways, has been a bit of a game changer in the House. I think the jury's still out on whether or not everything about it has been positive or not, but it does exist, it is there, and it is, it's a way to have outside people submit something. The Ethics Committee can also accept those same things, it's just people don't feel like it's quite as formalized a process. So that's kind of the parameters of it. And I thought instead of getting into details of exactly what the ethics rules are, that we just have some questions.
Sounds great. Yeah. If anyone has questions.
You can ask me about anything. It doesn't have to be about ethics. Yes?
So the OCE isn't comprised of members of Congress, but do they appoint the members who chooses? Who runs
The Speaker, the way the actual wording of how the OCE was set up actually has the Speaker chooses basically the 4 Republican members. The Democrat leader chooses the 4 Democrat members, but there's veto power on each other's choices. So whenever Banner wants to change the OCE membership, then I go to my Democrat counterpart and say, hey, this is who we want to put on. Vetting process is done, and then we make the replacement. And that's been done a couple of times, more than a couple of times. Yes?
Is there like a big difference between the Senate's and the House's rules for ethics? Or?
Yes, there are actually. They are so different in what you can and can't do that I advise people who are leaving the House when they go to the Senate, they really begin to learn and understand them. For instance, I'll give you a really simple one. The House has on it what they refer to as the airplane rules. And basically, I am not allowed to ever get on an airplane that's not a commercial flight. I can't, unless I pay whoever it is the cost of a charter flight, which of course would be prohibitively expensive. The Senate doesn't have those same rules. They can hop on a chartered flight and they reimburse whoever it is that is providing the flight at a first-class ticket rate. So if you don't know that and you hop on a flight, you are automatically in violation. You're not only in violation of House ethics rules, you're also in violation of the federal statute, criminal federal statute. So that's the kind of, there are those sorts of differences. There are also minor differences that deal with gift. Like I can explain, I can't accept lunch from anybody who is connected in any way to a lobbyist. I have that ban on me. There are a couple of exceptions, friendship exceptions. If you've known somebody for years, they become a lobbyist and you can really prove that they're a friend, they can, but they cannot expense it. It has to literally be an out-of-pocket expense. So as a result of this, I pay for all my lunches. I just don't even want to have to deal with it. Senate rules are a little different, but that's the kind of nuances. Yes?
If there is a violation of an ethics rule, what are some of the punishments you have or sanctions?
Yeah, it can be anything for members, it can be expulsion. The last member, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, to be expelled from the House was Jim Traficant, member from Ohio. I think he was the last one. Usually they resign before we get to that point. I'm pretty sure Duke Cunningham resigned before he did. Yeah, you're shaking your head, yes.
He was my congressman.
Oh, there we go. There we go. But Jim Traficant actually recently died. He got run over by a tractor. Literally did. And it did, it crushed him. But he was one who pushed it absolutely to the end, went through the entire ethics process, and then there was a House floor vote. It takes 2/3 of the House to vote out a member. Then there are lesser sanctions. There's censure, which basically means, you did something really bad and you should never do it again, kind of thing. And then ethics committee, what they do is they'll have an entire set of hearings. They will issue a report. The report goes to the House floor, and the House floor actually votes whether or not to censure a member. So that's really what happens. No other questions?
Joe Marie, I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
So as an attorney, you are held to certain ethical standards. Specifically as an attorney, obviously there are also House ethical standards. And so one of the things that dictates sort of how you have to operate as an attorney is who your client is. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about working as general counsel for the Speaker. Who is actually your client? Is it John Boehner? Is it the House at large? Is it the population that the House represents? If you could speak a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, it's actually, since I'm in the Speaker's office, it's actually an easier answer. When I was a committee counsel, it was a little trickier answer, like who exactly is my client? My client is the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. In his official capacity, I represent him. Anything he and I talk about is attorney-client privileged. Now, interestingly enough, the House does not recognize common law privileges, including attorney-client. It just doesn't. But good luck explaining that to the 10 members of the Ethics Committee, 8 of whom are attorneys. So, if someone who, sits back and says, I cannot discuss this, they will get it. They'll understand that it's just not going to happen. One complicating factor in what has happened over the years is I also have a duty to report violations. And there's been an interesting consequence of this, which is when people come to me with, I need to know if I'm in trouble, I've done X. I always start off with the, okay, let me just warn you, if you tell me something that is of a level that rises to where I have a duty to report to Ethics Committee, I will have to report that. Now, having said that, if we want to talk about, in general terms, where the ethics rules are and what happens under certain scenarios, I'm happy to do that. And that's usually how I approach these things, so that people will talk about, like, well, what if, and that's, it's actually kind of laid that out. And usually it's kind of minor things where people just suddenly get nervous. Like, I'll give you a really kind of funny, for instance. Under federal law, I am prohibited from donating to my own boss's campaign. I can't do it, absolutely can't do it. And I can't tell you that mistake has not been fully, and that's one that's actually kind of funny, especially when you explain to somebody like, you can't donate to your own boss, like you can't do it. That there's ways to correct it, obviously. You write checks back to the campaign and get reimbursed. But it's funny when people sort of figure this out, like they've done that. But other places, it's, that you can't accept a gift over $50, you can't accept a cash or a cash equivalent, you can't accept anything that's actually tied to an official act. One time I actually had a meeting with some folks, and as a thank you, I got this lovely thank you note card from this woman, and included in it was a $100 gift certificate to, like, I don't know, Macy's or something. And I remember laughing, and can you name off all the violations there? I mean, it literally, she tied it to an official act. It was a cash equivalent. I mean, it was just, and it was over $50. I mean, it was just like the trifecta of gift problems, but yeah. And one thing I will tell you, the House actually does have a mandatory requirement that staff take ethics training. So every year you have to take 1 hour of ethics training, and it literally goes through all of this, like the things that you can't do. A routine question I get is, oh, I got offered tickets to be in the box at the Capitals game. Can I go? And I'm like, well, sure you can go. You're just going to have to pay the highest fair market value of any ticket in the arena. But yeah, you can go. And who wants to do that? So.
So could you talk a little bit about how it was that you would determine who your client was when you're on the committee?
Committee is a little trickier. House committees are obviously made of members. There's a chairman, and then you have Republican members, and you have Democrat members, plus you have all the staff. When you're a committee counsel, your client is actually the committee. And so it really gets to this conflicts question of when do the committee's entrance diverge from a particular chairman, like two chairmen, like you have a chairman, you have a subcommittee. So in my mind, I always tell people, look, John Boehner is my chairman. I have to do what he wants. If you disagree with this, that's fine, but that's where the line is. It is a little bit trickier though. Yeah. Yes?
So you can't support your member directly. Can you support PACs that then in turn support your member directly?
Yes. That is not a violation of federal law. That is right. That is right. Now what can't be done, and I know where you're going with this, is if you are pushed, no official staffer can be pushed to do campaign work or campaign donations. That's another violation of the federal law. So there's not, and I actually tell people like, look, you know, just don't do it. Don't, you know, it's the reelect that is where the tie is, but I wouldn't be donating to anything else. Yeah. And a member cannot ask a staffer to do campaign work, period.
Another question that I had was, obviously working in the House, particularly with the Speaker, there's all kinds of legislation that is going through and coming across his desk that will affect markets and companies and all kinds of things. I would imagine that that leads to a lot of potential ethical issues, and I was wondering if you could maybe talk on some of those and how those get negotiated and how you handle those kind of issues as general counsel for the Speaker.
Yeah, you know, the one area that has really become kind of a flashpoint, I guess, is the, not only does the Ethics Committee discipline members, but so does the Department of Justice. And a real serious question has come up about campaign contributions and proximity to votes. And this is still an area that is emerging. Right now, you know, the way in which I advise members, advise my own boss, is to completely separate the two. So Boehner actually has a completely separate campaign staff. His official people are not the campaign staff. I don't work on his campaign. I could if I wanted to, but you know, I'm not paid by the campaign. I don't do that. We keep that separation so that his schedule is run completely by the campaign staff. His official schedule is run completely by the official office. And that way there can't be this question about that nexus that right now Department of Justice has actually been attempting to create. So that's one area where it can come up. Other areas are, you know, if members have a direct monetary interest, and you actually see this, a number of members have, and they have ownership in companies where they will actually recuse themselves from an official activity as a result of that nexus. I'm trying to think of, blind trust is another way. A member can and often will put all of their assets in a blind trust so that this question about voting and ownership and assets never arises. It is probably the most secure way in which you can assure that you won't have that question about, you know, are you voting your conscience or are you voting your pocketbook? And it's a very good way to do it. But I always tell members, if you have any doubts about it, you know, if there's a question that you think that there's going to be something, like if it's dealing with something that affects land you own, or you have literally ownership in a company, then you really probably should recuse yourself out of it. It's just the safer way to go. And people will always understand it when you say, I couldn't vote that. So, yeah.
Along that line, is it just the members' interests, or what about family members? Do their ownership interests and that sort of thing also pertain?
It honestly depends on how close the familial relationship is. Spouses, absolutely. And the way the ethics rules work, members have to disclose all of their assets annually. They come out usually around June 15th. The filing deadline is May 15th. They come out June 15th. That includes all spouse assets and any income coming into either of them. And that recusal would affect all of that. That's right. Yes.
I have a question. With your job as general counsel, is it strictly in protecting Boehner, or do you have the obligation to protect, like, both the entire staff? And a follow-up question is, in competing interests of what the chief of staff wants to do and in protecting your client, what you advise to do, who has the deciding vote in making the final decision, other than Boehner?
Yeah, I've actually been fairly lucky, I guess is the right word. I have tremendous support by Boehner and the chief of staff in the office. So when I tell people, look, it may not be technically an ethics violation, but it doesn't look great, you know, let's just not do it. I have never had one time where they have said, you know, like, no, let's go ahead and do this. And interestingly enough, it may have to do with, you know, sort of, I really think it's actually my boss's personal way that he conducts his life. And so it's actually made it fairly easy for me. Having said that, I know what you're getting at, which is people start pressuring to do certain things, and the worst is when you're in an office and you actually see things and you're caught in that quandary of what do I do, because at some point there is a duty to report it. So it's a tough situation. I am very, very thankful that I have always had his support and my chief of staff support. Yeah.
I have lots of questions. Going back to the vetting process, can you share with us kind of what that entails? Do you look at Facebook or what? How does that work?
The vetting process
For the OCE members?
You mean for how they're chosen?
Yeah, and you said there was a vetting process.
Well, the vetting, it's probably less than, it's basically me telling Pelosi's counterpart, you know, this is who we're thinking about putting on. And I usually say, well, this is why we're thinking about putting them on. Like the most recent appointment was Judy Bigger, who's a former congresswoman from Illinois. She's an attorney. She sat on the ethics committee when she was a member of Congress. You know, I just thought she was ideal for the OCE. You know, she also comes with background of being a member and understanding. The OCE, and I don't mean it in any way to pick on any particular thing, but sometimes there are violations that are really a house administration issue, and like a franking issue. And franking, if you don't know what that is, you know, it's when you do mail, we have all these rules about what you can and can't put in official mail and what can and can't be used under the member's frank, which is like a stamp, allows you to go through the mail. Oftentimes the ethics committee will say, look, you know, that's a violation, but please correct this, talk to House administration and you'll get it corrected. So somebody like a Judy Bigger understands that. You know, she has that history, has that background. She was a member herself. You know, she sat on the ethics committee and kind of, so she brings, which I think is actually good for the staff of the OCE, otherwise they would have no member contact at all, that relationship would be there.
So do you search out members, or do you put an announcement out, we're looking for members, please apply? How do you recruit people?
It's not easy. It is not easy, I will tell you right now. It's actually one of the challenges that we've had is finding people who understand ethics rules and understand how the house works itself, and you know, it's not particularly easy. Like one of the OCE members is a former chief administrative officer of the House. He's a former congressional staffer. You know, he gets how the place works and sort of how it's run. And you know, and having said this, the OCE has had a number of referrals over to the House Ethics Committee, a number of referrals. So, you know, right now it seems to, you know, it seems to have the right touch, I guess is the word. At any point, you know, ethics battles are ugly, and you know, as you can see, it has changed the balance of power. I mean, Ted Stevens is probably the most egregious example of an ethics issue that changed the dynamics of the Senate. And, you know, it was over Justice Department prosecutorial misconduct that led to the defeat of a United States Senator and changed the balance of power in the Senate. I have to tell you, that is probably the most outrageous one to me, but it happened. Yes?
I think a lot of people have a misconception of the relationship between a lobbyist and a member and staff, particularly since Abramoff. Would you be able to speak to the realistic relationship, not the Hollywood version,
The House
some
of Cards
ethical
version?
guidelines that oversee that relationship?
Yeah. Anybody who, you have to remember, you have the right to petition your government. God forbid we ever lose the right to petition your government. And what the Lobbying Disclosure Act required was people who are paid by organizations, associations, corporations, unions, whomever, to speak to members about that position are required, if they hit certain financial levels and certain amounts of contacts, they are required by law, and it comes with criminal sanctions if you don't do it, to file that you are a registered lobbyist. And you file it with the clerk of the House. There's an entire list of it. It's a searchable database. You can find out who all these people are. And I will tell you, most lobbyists are people who are advancing for their constituency, their group, the position so that members of Congress understand what that position is. I don't care if it's the price of milk. I don't care if it's the price of gasoline. I don't care what it is, education for children, whatever it is, if you're advocating on behalf of another group and being paid to do it, you're going to have to register as a lobbyist. Lobbyists have gotten a bad name because of people like Jack Abramoff, who, I need to be careful here, but let's put it this way, a number of people went to jail as a result of all that, including Jack Abramoff. So you're going to have that. It's unfortunate, but that does happen. And people, the law worked its will. People went to jail as a result of it. But most lobbyists, I mean, they're regular people who are really trying to put forward it could be anything from a social issue to an economic issue to foreign policy issue, tax issue.
Do you follow with the Speaker Boehner to when he goes to Ohio, or do you usually just stay on the Hill?
No, I do not travel with the campaign staff. Boehner actually has 3 offices. One, and the most important, is the Ohio 8 staff. That's his congressional district, people he represents, that's people back home. They are the most important of all of us, because they represent the congressional folks back home. And we have an entire staff, and I work really closely with them. They're official staff. I work really closely with them. If there's issues that come up that are Ohio 8 specific, I do everything I can to help answer questions or to address them. But I'm a Washington staffer. Second group is the Speaker's office itself. I don't know, how many are there? 22.
Yeah, I think so.
So it's about 22 of us that actually directly work for the Speaker. And we're the institutional folks, making sure legislation gets on the House floor, member management questions, ethics questions, constitutional questions, quite frankly, of the institution itself. The Speaker has actually had to involve the House in litigation. We write a number of amicus briefs on behalf of the House for various constitutional questions. So there's an institutional side to that, which is in the Speaker's office. The third set of staff is the political operation. They are non-official staff. They're paid for either by the Real Act or through the PACs. And it's an entire operation that has, right now, here before the election, they are with Boehner full-time. Yes,
Good question. I was wondering if there's any common ethic issues that tend to arise with members of Congress. And there's certainly pitfalls that you're more likely to see than others.
It probably, the most common question I get is the line between official and what can be paid for on the official side and campaign and what can be paid for on the campaign side. And the easiest bright line on it I always tell people is you must decide at the outset, is this going to be a campaign event or is this going to be a political event? And once you decide, everything flows from that. Now, over time, when I first came to work on the Hill, oddly enough, there was a zero tolerance on commingling in any way the official and campaign. It was absolute zero tolerance. And it led to some difficulties that actually became burdens on the staff. And I'll give you a really simple example. You've got constituents coming in from Iowa, and you know they're coming in, they're going to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. You know, you want to serve them coffee and donuts. And unfortunately, for years that fell, because you can't use official funds for it, because it's refreshments, and you can't use campaign funds for it because you're in an official building. So unfortunately, it fell to either the chief of staff or usually the scheduler to pay for the coffee and donuts. So they created a minor exception when it was a constituent-related thing for refreshments. So that's the sort of thing that I have to explain to people. They're like, you know, I mean, I can actually pay for campaign funds in an official building? I'm like, yeah, that's the place you can do it. Another place is, I wish I had the cell phone that went off, is the cell phones. It used to be members had to carry around 2 cell phones. They had an official cell phone and they had a campaign cell phone. And it was just completely unworkable. And now, on the campaign side, that's the other rule you need to understand. The campaign cannot support the official. Now, there's an exception. You can pay for a phone with the campaign, and you can use it for official business. So you put your official schedule on there if you want. You can talk to people about official business through it. But and it gets tricky when you have Twitter accounts and other things, because I always tell people, you have an official Twitter, you have a campaign Twitter, and the two should never meet, but they can be on the same phone. I know, you probably, way more than you wanted to know. Yes?
You said that the ethics committee was split evenly among the parties represented, but is there ever partisan disagreement over how to interpret, you know, testimony or evidence about an investigation regarding a member of your own party?
Yeah, I will tell you, first of all, everything that both the OCE do and the ethics committee do, they do in absolute privacy until they report. So bitter disputes you would not find out about until the report came out. And if the report comes out, it means you have bipartisan agreement. Does that make sense? So if you end up stuck in a 5-5 vote over a bitter dispute, in a lot of ways, the ways to think about this is you're probably going to either have unanimous consent, all 10 members are going to agree to it, or maybe somebody recuses themselves for some reason, or you're going to end up in this very partisan, 5-5 split. And the ethics committee has had troubles along that line in the past, with specific members, especially your higher profile members, but usually they get to a point where they are able to work through it and you get a result out of it.
So we're coming up on the hour, but before we finish, I was wondering, you spoke at the beginning about when you were in their shoes, you never would have imagined that you would get to where you got to. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about sort of the steps that you did take to get there, and then any advice that you would have for anyone in the room who would like to pursue a path, a legal path in the House or in Congress in general, and just thoughts that you would have for them with regard to that.
Yeah, I may turn the second part to you.
Okay.
I can tell you, when I graduated from law school, the market was very tight. I know you all are facing the same thing, quite frankly. And I did a scattershot approach basically to come to Washington, and I sent out a number of resumes, writing samples, and cover letters, and out of all that, I got one offer, and I took it. It was actually the Department of Labor, and about a year after I've been working there, I had a friend who worked on Capitol Hill who contacted me and said, hey, I think they're looking for a labor lawyer over at the Education Labor Committee. Well, once I got into looking into it, I realized that they're not looking for labor lawyer, they're actually looking for somebody on education. And it turns out I literally threw my resume in, kind of just shot in the dark kind of thing. And lo and behold, I got an interview with a member of Congress, and I thought, how do you not interview with a member? And 15 minutes into the interview, I got offered the job, which was amazing. So I can't guarantee you that that's what will happen to you, but it is how I got my start on Capitol Hill. And as they always say, how you do your work ethic is what will keep you in your jobs. And people, I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but people recognize me as somebody who worked hard, really learned my craft. I decided pretty early on to learn the House rules, which is what I did, learn the ethics rules, which is what I did. And in a lot of ways, I became the most knowledgeable staffer in that one area. It's not a sexy thing to do, but I learned it. And as a result of that, it opened doors to other things. And I've been on Capitol Hill now for a long time.
So I don't think, if there are any other questions, Jo Marie, would you mind staying around a little bit if people have other questions? But I know people have classes to get to, so I just wanted to thank you all for coming again, and again, thank Jo Marie for coming.